What I'm about to show you will destroy every childhood memory you have of this fairy tale. Because the real Cinderella didn't sweep floors, she sat in the ashes of her burned mother, learning necromancy. Her stepfamily weren't cruel relatives. They were fellow witches training her to overthrow Christian Europe. Picture this. A young woman kneels in blood-soaked ashes, her hands trembling as she picks bone fragments from the fireplace. The smell of charred flesh still lingers in the air. This isn't the fairy tale you know. This is the true story of Cinderella, and it's far more terrifying than Disney ever dared to show. Who was the real Cinderella? And why did centuries of mothers tell their daughters such a dark, twisted tale before it became sanitized for modern audiences? We've all heard the story of the glass slipper and the pumpkin carriage. But few know that Cinderella's earliest versions involved ritual sacrifice, cannibalism, and accusations of witchcraft that sent real women to burning stakes across medieval Europe. The original tale wasn't about finding Prince Charming. It was about survival in a world where being different could get you killed. Before we descend into the forgotten darkness of Europe's most beloved fairy tale, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it? Are you alone right now? Good. Because what you're about to discover will change how you see childhood stories forever. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Cinderella isn't just a fairy tale. She's the echo of real women who were hunted, tortured, and burned alive for the crime of being extraordinary. In the year 850 CE, in a monastery hidden deep in the forests of what would become Germany, a monk named Brother Aldrich writes frantically by candlelight. His hands shake as he documents a story that terrifies him, yet he knows it must be preserved. Outside his window, orange flames dance against the night sky. Another village burns. Another woman accused of witchcraft dies screaming. The tale he records is nothing like the version your mother whispered to you at bedtime. This Cinderella, called Aschenbrödel in the original German, doesn't sweep floors and sing to mice. She sits among human ashes, communing with the dead, calling forth spirits from the fireplace where her own mother's bones were burned. Brother Aldrich's trembling hand scratches across parchment. She who dwells in ash speaks with those who have passed beyond the veil. The spirits of the burned grant her power beyond mortal understanding. But such gifts come with a price that mortals should fear to pay. You see, in medieval Europe, kitchens weren't just places to cook. They were the spiritual heart of the home. The hearth fire burned continuously. It was never allowed to die, because it represented the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Ashes weren't just refuse. They were sacred remains that connected families to their ancestors. When Cinderella sat in those ashes, she wasn't being punished. She was practicing necromancy. The earliest versions describe her as a young woman with strange abilities. She could speak to the spirits of the dead who lived in the fire. She could predict the future by reading patterns in soot and ember. Most disturbing of all, she could call forth the bones of the deceased to aid her in times of need. But this isn't even the strangest part of her story. In the original tale, when Cinderella's stepsisters try to fit into the golden slipper, they don't just struggle with the size. They mutilate themselves. The first sister cuts off her toes with a butcher's knife, letting blood fill the slipper to make it fit. The second hacks off her heel, her screams echoing through the castle courtyard as bone splinters and flesh tears. The blood seeping through the slipper isn't metaphorical, it's literal. And when the prince sees the crimson stains, he doesn't recoil in horror. He's fascinated. Because in the medieval mind, blood sacrifice was the ultimate proof of devotion. Brother Aldrich's account grows more disturbing. The prince sought not beauty, but power. He knew that she who commanded the spirits of ash and bone could bring prosperity to his kingdom, or curse it beyond redemption. This wasn't a love story. It was a recruitment. The prince wasn't searching for a bride. He was hunting for a witch powerful enough to secure his throne through supernatural means. And Cinderella? She used his desire against him, weaving spells through dance and seduction, binding him to her will with magic far older than Christianity itself. The question that haunted Brother Aldrich, the question that should haunt us today: was Cinderella the victim in this story? Or was she the predator? 3 years before Cinderella's transformation, in a cottage at the edge of a dark Bavarian forest, a dying woman clutches her daughter's hands. Elizabeth, known throughout the village for her healing herbs and uncanny ability to predict storms, feels death creeping through her lungs like ice water. "Promise me," she whispers to young Cinderella, her breath rattling in her chest. "When they come for my body, you will not let them bury me in consecrated ground. Promise me you will burn my remains and keep my ashes close. Only then can I protect you from what's coming." The child nods, not understanding the terrible burden being placed upon her shoulders. Outside, church bells toll the hour of vespers, but their sound carries an ominous weight. The local priest, Father Matthias, has been watching their cottage with suspicious eyes. Elizabeth's reputation as a healer has begun to attract the wrong kind of attention. When Elizabeth dies 3 days later, the villagers whisper of curses and unnatural causes. Her body is found surrounded by dead birds, dozens of them, arranged in perfect circles around her bed. No one can explain how they entered the sealed room or why they chose to die there. Father Matthias arrives with armed men, demanding Elizabeth be buried immediately in unconsecrated ground outside the village walls. "She was touched by darkness," he declares, making the sign of the cross. "Her very presence corrupts the soil." But Cinderella has other plans. That night, as the village sleeps, she steals her mother's body from the makeshift morgue in the church cellar. Working by moonlight, her small hands surprisingly strong, she drags the corpse through the forest to their family cottage. There, in the great stone fireplace, where countless meals had been prepared, where warmth had sustained them through harsh winters, she builds a pyre. The flames dance higher than any fire should, casting shadows that seem to move independently of their sources. As her mother's body burns, Cinderella begins to hear voices in the crackling wood. Whispers in a language older than Latin, older than German, older than memory itself. But what happened next would haunt the village for generations. As Elizabeth's flesh falls away, revealing bone that glows white-hot in the supernatural fire, animals begin to gather. Wolves emerge from the deepest forest. Ravens descend from the night sky. Even stranger creatures, things with too many eyes, things that walk upright but cast no shadows, press against the cottage windows. They're not there to threaten. They've come to pay homage, to witness the transformation of an ordinary girl into something far more dangerous. When dawn breaks, Cinderella sits alone in the cold ashes, her mother's bones reduced to powder in her cupped palms. But she is no longer the child who had stolen a corpse in darkness. Her eyes now hold depths that seem to reflect flickering flames, even in daylight. Her voice carries echoes of the whispers she heard in the fire. And when she speaks to the ashes in her hands, they respond. "Mother," she whispers, "teach me what I need to know." The ashes swirl in her palms, forming symbols and patterns that speak of power, vengeance, and survival. Elizabeth may be dead, but she is far from gone. She has become something more useful than a living mother. She has become a supernatural advisor, bound to her daughter through ritual and flame. Father Matthias finds the cottage the next morning, drawn by reports of strange lights and unnatural sounds. He discovers the ashes, the burned-out fireplace, and the young woman who sits calmly in the ruins of her former life. "What have you done?" he demands, his voice shaking with fear and rage. Cinderella looks up at him with those new flame-touched eyes and smiles. "I've learned to listen to the dead, Father. They have so much to teach the living." 2 months after her mother's burning, Cinderella's father returns from his merchant travels with terrible news and a new wife. Heinrich, a man broken by grief and desperate for normalcy, barely recognizes his daughter. The child he left behind had been shy, ordinary, unremarkable. The young woman who greets him moves with predatory grace, her gaze holding secrets that make him shiver involuntarily. "This is Margaret," he announces, presenting a stern-faced woman with 2 daughters of her own. "She has agreed to be your new mother." But Margaret is no ordinary widow seeking security. She carries her own dark history, her own terrible knowledge. The moment she sees Cinderella, she recognizes what the girl has become. The signs are unmistakable to those who know how to look. The way shadows bend toward her, the way flames lean in her direction, the way animals watch her with almost human intelligence. Margaret has spent years running from accusations of witchcraft, moving from town to town whenever suspicions grew too dangerous. She knows that harboring a practicing necromancer could mean death for her entire family. But she also recognizes opportunity when she sees it. That first night, as Heinrich sleeps exhausted from his travels, Margarete confronts Cinderella in the kitchen. "I know what you've done," she whispers, gesturing toward the fireplace where Elizabeth's ashes are hidden within the stonework. "I can smell the ritual smoke that still clings to these walls. You've bound your mother's spirit to this place." Cinderella doesn't deny it. Instead, she kneels by the hearth and speaks a single word in the ancient tongue her mother's ashes taught her. The fire roars to life without kindling, casting dancing shadows that form almost recognizable faces in the flickering light. Margaret doesn't recoil. Instead, she nods with grim approval. "Good," she says. "Then you'll understand why you must be careful. The church grows bolder in its hunt for women like us. 3 villages over, they burned a healer named Anna just last month. Her only crime was successfully treating a nobleman's fever when the priest's prayers failed." But this isn't even the most shocking part of Margaret's revelation. She opens a leather satchel and removes objects that make Cinderella's blood run cold. Iron nails bent into specific shapes, dried herbs bound with hair, and small cloth dolls with pins thrust through their hearts. These are the tools of maleficium, harmful magic designed to cause suffering and death. "Your mother was a healer," Margaret continues, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But I am something far more dangerous. I am a vengeance worker. Women hire me to curse unfaithful husbands, to blight the crops of enemies, to ensure that those who wrong them suffer consequences." She explains that she married Heinrich not for love or security, but because she needed a new identity, a new place to practice her craft. The witch hunters had grown too close in her previous town, and she barely escaped with her daughters' lives. "But you," she says, studying Cinderella with calculating eyes, "you could be useful to me. Your necromantic abilities combined with my curse work could make us both wealthy and feared." The dead can reveal secrets the living work desperately to hide. Cinderella considers this offer, her hand absently stirring the ashes in the fireplace. Her mother's spirit whispers warnings, but also acknowledgments. Margaret is dangerous, but she is also knowledgeable. She could teach Cinderella forms of magic that her mother never knew. "What would you want in return?" Cinderella asks. Margaret's smile reveals teeth stained dark from chewing herbs used in potion making. Obedience, secrecy, and when the time comes, you will help me destroy those who have wronged me in the past. Starting with the priest who had my sister burned 2 years ago. That night, as Heinrich snores peacefully, unaware that his house now shelters 2 practicing witches, Cinderella makes her choice. She binds herself to Margaret through a ritual that mingles their blood with her mother's ashes, creating a connection that will prove impossible to break. But she doesn't realize that Margaret has her own plans for vengeance. Plans that include using Cinderella's growing power to eliminate threats, including Cinderella herself when she's no longer useful. The stepmother hasn't come to provide a home for a grieving child. She has come to recruit a weapon. For 3 years, Cinderella learns arts that would have horrified her deceased mother. Under Margaret's tutelage, she discovers how to read the future in blood patterns, how to craft curses that follow victims across great distances, and how to bind spirits not just to communicate with them, but to command them. The pretense of domestic servitude serves as perfect camouflage. When villagers see Cinderella scrubbing floors and tending the fire, they assume she's been relegated to servant status by her new stepfamily. They don't realize that every motion of her work conceals ritual purpose. When she sweeps with her birch broom, she's actually drawing protective symbols in the dust that ward the house against discovery by church investigators. When she tends the cooking fire, she's feeding her mother's ashes with specific herbs that strengthen the spiritual bond between them. When she draws water from the well, she's collecting materials for scrying rituals that reveal the secrets of their enemies. Her stepsisters, Drusilla and Anastasia, serve as unwitting assistants. Margaret has convinced them that Cinderella is merely a servant, but she has also taught them minor magical practices under the guise of women's wisdom. They don't realize they're participating in witchcraft when they help gather midnight herbs or when they unknowingly speak incantations disguised as household songs. But the most disturbing aspect of Cinderella's training involves what Margaret calls the communion of ashes. Every night, after the household sleeps, Cinderella sits in the great fireplace and covers herself with her mother's remains. The physical contact allows Elizabeth's spirit to speak more clearly, to share knowledge that grows darker with each conversation. The prince grows restless. Her mother's voice whispers through the ashes. His father's health fails, and ambitious nobles circle like vultures. Soon there will be opportunities for a woman who can offer what conventional advisors cannot. Elizabeth's ghost has been watching the royal court, gathering information about political weaknesses, secret desires, and hidden fears. She reveals that Prince Friedrich is not the noble hero of courtly songs, but a young man terrified of his own inadequacy, desperate for power that will secure his position against rivals. He has already consulted fortune-tellers and hedge witches, Elizabeth continues. But they offer only parlor tricks. He seeks real magic, real power, and he is willing to pay any price to obtain it. But this isn't even the strangest part of their nocturnal communications. Elizabeth reveals that the royal bloodline carries a curse that has plagued the kingdom for 7 generations. Each ruler dies violently before reaching old age, and their heirs struggle with madness that grows worse with each passing year. The current king conceals his deteriorating mental state behind elaborate court ceremonies. But Elizabeth's spirit has witnessed his private moments of terror and confusion. The curse can only be broken by a ritual that requires the willing participation of a necromancer, she explains. Someone who can speak with the dead king who first brought this doom upon his lineage. Prince Friedrich doesn't know this yet, but he will learn it soon enough. Margaret, overhearing these conversations from the shadows, begins to formulate a plan that will use Cinderella's unique abilities to infiltrate the royal court. She sees an opportunity not just for wealth, but for the kind of power that could protect women like themselves from church persecution forever. She begins teaching Cinderella more sophisticated arts, how to craft glamours that can alter her appearance, how to weave enchantments into clothing that compel attraction and obedience, and most importantly, how to mask her magical aura so completely that even experienced witch hunters cannot detect her true nature. Soon, Margaret promises, there will be a royal ball. The prince seeks a bride, but he seeks much more than that. He seeks salvation from the curse that threatens to destroy his family line. And we are going to ensure that he finds exactly what he's looking for. Cinderella nods, understanding that her life as a hidden practitioner is about to end. Soon she will step into the wider world, carrying her mother's ashes and Margaret's teachings into the heart of political power. But what she doesn't realize is that Margarete has been in contact with other practitioners throughout the region, weaving a conspiracy that extends far beyond one kingdom, one prince, one curse. She has been building a network of witches and wise women who seek to overturn the Christian order that has made their existence so precarious. And Cinderella, with her rare necromantic gifts, is intended to be the key that unlocks a future where women like themselves rule from the shadows, guiding kings and kingdoms through supernatural means. The question that haunts these midnight rituals: has Cinderella chosen her path, or has her path chosen her? On the night before the prince's grand ball, Margaret leads Cinderella deep into the Schwarzwald, the black forest that borders their village. They travel in darkness, guided by Elizabeth's spirit, to a clearing known only to the most initiated practitioners of the old ways. Here, ancient trees form a natural cathedral around a circle of standing stones that predate Christian settlements by thousands of years. The stones bear carvings of symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon directly, spirals that seem to move in peripheral vision, faces that shift between human and animal features, runes that whisper secrets in languages that have been dead for millennia. This is where we will prepare you for tomorrow, Margaret announces, setting down a bundle of tools that gleam wickedly in the moonlight. But first, you must understand the true nature of the power you're about to wield. She guides Cinderella to the center of the stone circle, where the earth has been worn smooth by countless feet over countless generations. There, barely visible in the dim light, lie hundreds of small bones, finger bones, toe bones, teeth, and fragments of skull, the remains of sacrifices offered to powers that Christianity has tried but failed to completely suppress. Each of these represents a woman who walked this path before you. Margaret explains, kneeling to gather specific bones into patterns around Cinderella's feet. Some were healers like your mother. Others were seers, shape changers, weather workers. All of them faced the choice that now confronts you: remain hidden and eventually be discovered and destroyed, or step forward and claim the power to protect your kind. Elizabeth's voice emerges from the ashes Cinderella carries in a pouch at her waist. The bones remember, child. They remember the burning times The drowning times, the breaking times. They remember what it means to be hunted for the crime of being different. But this isn't even the most disturbing part of the ritual. Margaret begins to chant in a language that predates Latin, predates Germanic tongues, predates any human speech that Cinderella recognizes. As her voice rises and falls in complex rhythms, the bones around Cinderella's feet begin to glow with pale, cold light. The light spreads upward, outlining her body in an aura of necromantic energy. "Now," Margaret commands, "call to them. Ask them to lend you their memories, their knowledge, their power." Cinderella hesitates. Speaking to her mother's spirit feels natural, even comforting. But summoning the ghosts of unknown dead, particularly those who died violent deaths, seems far more dangerous. "I can feel their anger," she whispers. "They're furious about how they died. What if they turn that rage against me? Then you learn to be stronger than their fury." Margaret replies without sympathy. "The prince you will meet tomorrow commands armies, controls vast wealth, and holds the power of life and death over thousands. If you approach him as merely a village girl with minor talents, he will use you and discard you. But if you come to him as a vessel for the accumulated wisdom and power of every witch who died to protect her sisters, you become his equal, or his superior." Elizabeth's spirit urges her daughter forward. "The dead cannot hurt you, child. They can only teach you. And their greatest lesson is this: never again allow yourself to be powerless." Cinderella closes her eyes and opens her mind to the bone circle. Immediately, she is overwhelmed by a flood of memories that are not her own. She sees Anna of Bremen, burned in 1456 for successfully predicting a plague that church authorities claimed was God's unknowable will. She experiences the terror of Gisela the Wise Woman as soldiers drag her from her cottage, her crime being the ability to ease difficult childbirth when prayers alone failed. She feels the final thoughts of Bertha Herbwife as flames consume her flesh. Her last prayer not for salvation, but for vengeance against those who condemned her. But with the memories of their deaths come their skills. Anna's gift for reading disease patterns in urine and breath. Gisela's knowledge of herbs that can induce or prevent pregnancy. Bertha's mastery of poisons disguised as healing remedies. By dawn, Cinderella has absorbed the experiences of dozens of executed practitioners. She knows methods of magic that her mother never imagined, techniques for survival that Margaret never taught her. And most importantly, she understands the true scope of the war being waged between the old ways and the new religion. "Now," Margaret says as the first light touches the bone circle, "you are ready to meet a prince." But as they prepare to leave the forest, Elizabeth's spirit issues a final warning. "Remember, daughter, power borrowed from the angry dead comes with a price. They will expect payment in the form of justice for their murders. If you fail to provide it, they will turn their hunger against you instead." The night of Prince Friedrich's grand ball, Cinderella undergoes a transformation that has nothing to do with fairy godmothers or pumpkin carriages. Instead, she performs a ritual taught by the bones of dead witches. One that will allow her to walk among nobility while concealing her true nature from the church officials who attend such events as spiritual advisors to the court. In the ruins of an abandoned chapel deep in the forest, Margaret helps her stepdaughter prepare for what they both know will be either triumph or death. There is no middle ground when a practicing necromancer enters the heart of Christian political power. "The glamour must be perfect," Margaret warns, grinding bones from the forest circle into a powder that glows faintly in the moonlight. One mistake, one moment where your true nature shows through, and you'll be dragged to the stake before dawn. Cinderella stands naked in the center of the ruined altar, while Margaret paints symbols across her skin using ink made from her mother's ashes mixed with blood, willingly given by women who died for witchcraft. Each symbol serves a specific purpose. Some hide her magical aura from detection, others enhance her natural beauty to supernatural levels, and still others plant suggestions in the minds of those who look upon her. "Remember," Elizabeth's voice whispers from the ash ink as it dries on her daughter's skin, "you are not going to this ball to find love. You are going to identify your enemies, gather intelligence about the royal curse, and position yourself as indispensable to the prince's future survival." The dress Cinderella wears was not conjured by magic, but stolen from the wardrobe of a merchant's daughter who died of plague the previous month. Margaret has modified it extensively, weaving threads of silver, sacred to the moon and deadly to some supernatural creatures, into patterns that strengthen the wearer's will and cloud the judgment of those who might oppose her. The famous slippers are not made of glass, but of gold taken from melted down offerings stolen from church altars. Each step Cinderella takes in them leaves behind traces of consecrated metal that will confuse any attempts at magical tracking later. But this isn't even the most dangerous aspect of her preparation. Hidden within the dress's elaborate embroidery, Margaret has sewn pockets containing powders and potions designed for specific purposes. One pocket holds ground bone from suicides, useful for inducing despair in enemies. Another contains herbs that can cause madness when introduced into wine or food. A third holds a substance so lethal that a pinch under the fingernails could kill with a casual touch. These are not to be used lightly, Margaret warns. But if you are discovered, if they move to arrest you, it's better to take several of them with you than to burn alone. As midnight approaches and the transformation ritual reaches its climax, Cinderella looks at herself in a mirror made from polished black obsidian, a material that shows supernatural auras as well as physical appearances. What she sees makes her gasp. The glamour has worked perfectly. She appears to be a noblewoman of extraordinary beauty, her skin luminous with health, her eyes sparkling with intelligence and wit. But beneath the illusion, visible only in the obsidian mirror, her true form shows the marks of her magical evolution. Her eyes hold flickering flames, her fingernails have grown long and sharp as claws, and shadows seem to cling to her form like living creatures. "You are becoming something new," Elizabeth observes approvingly. "Not fully human, but not yet one of the dead. You walk between worlds now, and that gives you power that neither the living nor the dead alone can possess." At the stroke of midnight, Cinderella arrives at the royal palace in a carriage that appears to be drawn by magnificent white horses, but is actually pulled by the animated skeletons of war horses killed in battle, disguised by the same glamour that conceals her true nature. To mortal eyes, everything appears magical, but benign. To supernatural perception, her entrance is a declaration of war against the natural order. Prince Friedrich sees her the moment she enters the ballroom, and his reaction confirms everything her mother's spirit has told her about his desperate need for supernatural assistance. He doesn't just notice her beauty, he recognizes her power even through the glamour. His eyes widen with a mixture of desire and relief, as if he has been waiting his entire life for someone exactly like her. But as Cinderella begins her deadly dance of seduction and manipulation, she doesn't realize that she is not the only supernatural predator at the ball. Hidden among the courtiers and guests are agents of the church's secret inquisition, trained to detect and eliminate exactly her kind of threat. The real game is about to begin, and the stakes are higher than a simple royal marriage. As Prince Friedrich leads Cinderella onto the dance floor, she immediately senses the supernatural malady that plagues him. It's not visible to ordinary observers, but her enhanced perceptions reveal the truth. Dark tendrils of cursed energy writhe around his body like invisible serpents, feeding on his life force and sanity. "You see it, don't you?" he whispers as they move together to the court musician's melody. His hand trembles against hers, and she feels the fever that burns just beneath his skin. The physicians call it melancholia, but I know better. My family carries a doom that has killed every king for 7 generations. Through her mother's spiritual guidance, Cinderella has already learned the curse's origin, but she allows the prince to tell his version of the story. It serves her purposes to understand how much he knows about his family's supernatural affliction. "My ancestor, King Aldrich the Bold, made a pact with something that should never have been summoned." Friedrich continues, his voice barely audible beneath the music. "He sought victory in a war that was destroying his kingdom, and he paid the price in blood and souls. Every ruler since has died before seeing his 40th year, and each death is more horrible than the last." As they dance, Cinderella uses techniques learned from the forest bones to probe deeper into the curse's structure. What she discovers makes her blood run cold. This is not merely a supernatural affliction, it's a feeding arrangement. Something ancient and hungry has been consuming the royal bloodline for centuries, growing stronger with each death. "The worst part," the prince whispers, "is that I can feel it awakening. The thing that killed my forefathers stirs in whatever realm it inhabits. Sometimes I dream of it, a creature of shadow and famine that wears the faces of my ancestors as it speaks to me. It promises that my death will be different, more intimate. But this isn't even the most disturbing part of the curse's nature. Through her necromantic abilities, Cinderella realizes that the entity feeding on the royal line has been growing more sophisticated with each victim. King Aldrich's death was swift, a simple matter of life force drainage. But subsequent rulers have died in increasingly elaborate ways. Madness that drives them to self-mutilation, wasting diseases that consume them slowly while they remain conscious, and phantom plagues that kill them through supernatural means that leave no physical evidence. It's learning. Elizabeth's spirit warns through the ashes hidden in Cinderella's dress. Each death teaches it new methods of torment. By the time it reaches this prince, it will have perfected techniques of suffering that span years rather than months. Prince Friedrich confirms this assessment without realizing it. "My father's physicians believe he suffers from a failing mind, but I've watched him in his private moments. He speaks to empty air, recoils from shadows that aren't there, and screams about things crawling under his skin. Yet when court is in session, he appears completely lucid. Whatever afflicts him enjoys the pretense of normalcy." As the dance continues, Cinderella makes a calculated decision. She will offer to help break the curse, but not out of compassion. The entity that feeds on royal blood represents exactly the kind of ancient power that could be bargained with, redirected, or even controlled by someone with sufficient knowledge and skill. "I might know of a way to help you," she whispers, allowing just enough of her true nature to show through the glamour that the prince can sense her supernatural abilities. But such assistance would require absolute trust and complete secrecy. Friedrich's grip on her hand tightens desperately. "Anything. I've consulted every scholar, every priest, every wise woman in the kingdom. Nothing has worked. If you can offer even the possibility of breaking this curse, I will pay any price you name." "The price," Cinderella replies with a smile that would terrify him if he could see past her glamour, "is marriage. Not for love, but for power. I cannot break a curse of this magnitude from outside the royal bloodline. I must be bound to it through the most intimate of connections." What she doesn't tell him is that marriage to a cursed royal will give her access to the entity itself. She plans not to destroy it, but to negotiate with it, to redirect its hunger toward her enemies while protecting herself and those she chooses to spare. Friedrich agrees immediately, sealing a bargain that he believes will save his life, but which actually ensures his participation in a supernatural alliance that will reshape the kingdom's future. As midnight approaches and the glamour that conceals Cinderella's true nature begins to weaken, she makes her strategic retreat, leaving behind one gold slipper as both a calling card and a magical anchor. The slipper will allow her to scry on the prince's activities and ensure that he remains obsessed with finding her again. But as she flees the ballroom, she doesn't notice the figure that watches from the shadows, a man in priest's robes whose eyes glow with unnatural light, whose presence emanates the kind of supernatural authority that even ancient entities fear. The church's secret weapon has identified its target. Brother Sebastian Krantz is not an ordinary priest. Trained in Rome's most secret seminaries, initiated into mysteries that the church publicly denies exist, he serves as the Vatican's primary agent in dealing with supernatural threats that conventional exorcism cannot address. His presence at Prince Friedrich's ball was not coincidental. The church has been monitoring the royal curse for decades, waiting for someone to attempt what Cinderella has just undertaken. As he watches her flee the palace in her skeletal carriage, Sebastian recognizes the specific type of necromantic glamour being used. The bone dust in her cosmetics, the ash ink patterns on her skin, the reanimated horses pulling her transport. These are techniques documented in only the most forbidden grimoires, practices that require communion with the violently dead. "Interesting," he murmurs, making notes in a journal bound with human skin. Not a hedge witch or village healer, but a true adept. Someone has been training this one in arts that died with the classical necromancers of antiquity. Sebastian's investigation begins immediately. Using methods that would horrify ordinary church officials, he communes with angels of judgment, beings of such terrifying purity that looking upon them directly would blind mortal eyes. These entities exist to hunt and destroy supernatural corruption, and they have been tracking the growing concentration of necromantic energy in this region for months. The girl is not the primary threat. The angel Uriel communicates through patterns of flame that write themselves across Sebastian's vision. She serves a conspiracy of practitioners who seek to establish supernatural dominion over temporal authority. The royal curse was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be redirected toward the church's servants. Through techniques learned in the Vatican's deepest archives, Sebastian begins to trace the connections between Cinderella and the larger network of witches that has been forming throughout the Germanic regions. He discovers Margaret's true identity as Marguerite de Corbeau, a French practitioner who was expelled from her homeland for attempting to curse the Dauphin. He uncovers evidence of the forest circle, the bone rituals, and the growing alliance between desperate women and ancient entities. But this isn't even the most dangerous aspect of what he discovers. Sebastian's investigation reveals that the conspiracy extends far beyond local politics. Similar networks of practitioners are operating throughout Christian Europe, all coordinating their efforts to infiltrate royal courts, noble houses, and merchant guilds. Their ultimate goal is not merely survival, but the systematic replacement of Christian authority with a shadow government guided by supernatural intelligence. They seek to return to the old ways. Uriel explains. When kings were chosen by omens and ruled through rituals, when temporal power was inseparable from spiritual authority, when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead was maintained by those who could speak to both. The angel reveals that the entity feeding on the royal curse is not an independent predator, but a servant of much older powers that ruled Europe before Christianity arrived. The curse was designed not to destroy the royal line, but to weaken it sufficiently that it could be controlled by those who understood its supernatural nature. Cinderella's offer to break the curse through marriage represents the culmination of a plan decades in the making. Once she becomes queen, she will use her position to legitimize practitioners throughout the kingdom, establish supernatural advisors in positions of political power, and create legal protections for those accused of witchcraft. It's actually quite brilliant, Sebastian admits with grudging professional respect. Rather than fighting the church directly, they seek to make it irrelevant by offering rulers more effective supernatural assistance than prayer and liturgy can provide. But the church's response will be equally strategic. Sebastian begins assembling a team of specialists trained in combating supernatural infiltration. Warrior priests whose faith has been forged in battles against demons, scholarly monks who understand the theoretical frameworks underlying maleficium, and reformed practitioners who have turned their knowledge against their former associates. The plan is not simply to expose and execute Cinderella. The church intends to use her as bait, to allow her conspiracy to proceed far enough that every participant reveals themselves, and then to strike simultaneously across the entire network. Let her marry the prince, Sebastian decides, writing new instructions in his journal. Let her believe she has succeeded. When the trap closes, we will eliminate not just individual witches, but the entire infrastructure that has supported their kind for generations. As he writes, Sebastian doesn't realize that Margaret's network includes practitioners skilled in angelic magic as well as demonic arts. His communications with Uriel have been observed and analyzed by spirits that serve different masters. And his plans are already being transmitted to those who can use such intelligence to their advantage. The game of shadows grows more complex with each move, and both sides prepare for a confrontation that will determine whether Europe's future belongs to Christian authority or to older, darker forms of power. Prince Friedrich's search for the mysterious woman who fits the golden slipper becomes a kingdom-wide obsession that serves multiple hidden purposes. While the public believes they are witnessing a romantic quest, those who understand the supernatural currents beneath the surface recognize it as a summoning ritual of unprecedented scale. The slipper itself, crafted from consecrated gold stolen from church altars, serves as both a tracking device and a binding charm. Every woman who attempts to wear it creates a psychic connection that allows Cinderella to glimpse their memories, their fears, and their secrets. Through these connections, she builds a comprehensive map of potential allies and enemies throughout the realm. Each failed fitting brings me closer to complete knowledge of this kingdom's hidden power structure, she explains to her mother's spirit during their nightly communion. I can see which families harbor practitioners, which nobles keep supernatural advisors in secret, and which church officials know more about the old ways than their vows would suggest. Elizabeth's ashes swirl approvingly in the fireplace. And what do you see, daughter? Are there others like us hidden throughout the realm? The answer is both encouraging and terrifying. Cinderella's psychic survey reveals dozens of women throughout the kingdom who possess varying degrees of supernatural ability. Some are natural empaths who sense emotions and intentions. Others show precognitive abilities that manifest as unusual luck in avoiding danger. Still others demonstrate minor elemental affinities, an unusual ability to predict weather, to encourage plant growth, or to calm frightened animals. But most disturbing of all, she discovers that many of these women are already under surveillance by the church's secret investigators. Their names appear in carefully concealed lists maintained by parish priests who report suspicious behavior to higher authorities. The infrastructure for a kingdom-wide witch hunt already exists, waiting only for the right trigger to activate it. They're far more organized than we anticipated, Cinderella admits with growing concern. If we move too quickly, we could provide the justification they need to begin mass arrests. But this isn't even the most shocking discovery her slipper spying reveals. Through the memories of women who handle the golden footwear, Cinderella learns that Brother Sebastian has been systematically documenting supernatural activity for years. His records include detailed descriptions of rituals, comprehensive genealogies of families suspected of harboring practitioners, and most damning of all, evidence of collaboration between certain nobles and the practitioners they secretly employ. She realizes that her stepfamily's activities have been monitored for months. Sebastian knows about the forest circle, the bone rituals, and Margaret's true identity. The only reason they haven't been arrested is that the church prefers to observe and gather intelligence rather than strike prematurely. We're not the hunters in this situation, Elizabeth Spirit observes grimly. We're the prey, and we've been walking into increasingly sophisticated traps without realizing it. The revelation forces Cinderella to accelerate her timeline. Rather than gradually building influence after marriage, she realizes she must consolidate power immediately upon becoming queen, before the church can activate its persecution network. But her most shocking discovery comes when the slipper finally reaches her stepsisters. When Drusilla attempts to force her foot into the golden shoe, her memories reveal a secret that changes everything. She and Anastasia are not Margaret's biological daughters, but practitioners' children rescued from previous witch hunts and raised as part of a larger conspiracy. The stepsisters' entire identity as spoiled, ordinary noblewomen is itself a form of glamour, designed to conceal the fact that they possess significant supernatural abilities. Their apparent cruelty to Cinderella has been elaborate theater, intended to maintain their cover while teaching her advanced techniques of emotional manipulation and psychological warfare. Everything has been orchestrated, Cinderella realizes with a mixture of admiration and horror. My father's death, Margaret's arrival, even the development of my own abilities, none of it was accidental. When she confronts her stepfamily with this knowledge, Margaret finally reveals the full scope of the conspiracy. Cinderella is not just a powerful individual who happens to serve their cause. She was specifically bred and trained to fulfill a prophecy recorded in the most ancient grimoires. The old texts speak of a child of ash and bone who will serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, Margaret explains. Her marriage to cursed royalty will create a bloodline capable of channeling power from both sides of death's boundary. Her children will rule not just through political authority, but through supernatural dominion that no earthly force can challenge. The prophecy explains why Cinderella's necromantic abilities manifested so strongly after her mother's death, why the bone rituals enhanced her power so dramatically, and why the royal curse responds to her presence. She is not simply a witch who happened to catch a prince's attention. She is the culmination of generations of careful breeding and magical preparation. But prophecies, as any practitioner knows, can be fulfilled in ways that surprise even those who engineer them. As Cinderella prepares for her final transformation from village witch to supernatural queen, she begins to formulate plans that neither her stepfamily nor the church anticipates. She will fulfill the prophecy, but on her own terms. The royal wedding between Prince Friedrich and the mysterious woman who fits the golden slipper takes place during the dark of the moon, at Cinderella's specific request. She claims the timing honors an obscure patron saint of matrimony. But those versed in supernatural lore recognize it as optimal for rituals involving communication between the living and the dead. The ceremony itself appears conventionally Christian on the surface, conducted by Archbishop Bernhard in the kingdom's greatest cathedral before an assembly of European nobility. But Cinderella has woven layers of older, darker ritual into every aspect of the proceedings, creating what practitioners call a nested working, a magical operation disguised within conventional religious observance. Her wedding dress, ostensibly pure white silk embroidered with gold thread, actually incorporates materials gathered from desecrated graves. Thread spun from the hair of executed criminals, pearls dissolved in water that has touched corpses, and silver worked by craftsmen who died violently while creating it. The dress serves as both ceremonial garment and magical focus, designed to channel necromantic energy during the most spiritually significant moment of the ritual. Do you see how the shadows gather around her? Brother Sebastian whispers to his assistant, Father Matthias, as they observe from their concealed position in the cathedral's upper gallery. Even blessed ground cannot fully dispel the aura of death that clings to her. Sebastian's trap is nearing its culmination. He has allowed the wedding to proceed because it will provide irrefutable proof of supernatural conspiracy that can justify the kingdom-wide purge he has been planning. Every practitioner who has been secretly supporting Cinderella's rise will reveal themselves through their participation in what they believe is their moment of triumph. But Cinderella has been equally busy preparing for this confrontation. Through her growing network of allied practitioners, she has identified and prepared counters for most of the church's supernatural weapons. The warriors priests Sebastian has assembled will find their blessed silver ineffective against creatures protected by older forms of sanctification. The scholarly monks will discover that their theoretical knowledge fails against practical magic refined over centuries of persecution. As Archbishop Bernhard begins the marriage ceremony, speaking the Latin words that will bind prince and witch in holy matrimony, Cinderella initiates her own ritual through subtle gestures and whispered phrases that seem like nervous bride's prayers, but actually invoke protective spirits and binding spells. But this isn't even the most dangerous aspect of the ceremony. At the moment when the Archbishop pronounces them husband and wife, Cinderella speaks a single word in the ancient tongue taught by her mother's ashes. The word reverberates through the cathedral with supernatural force, causing the stained glass windows to vibrate and the altar candles to flare with unnatural brilliance. The word is a summoning, calling forth the entity that has been feeding on the royal curse for 7 generations. But instead of appearing as the monstrous predator that has been tormenting the bloodline, it manifests as Cinderella has negotiated, as a bound servant, compelled to serve the new queen rather than consume her husband. Prince Friedrich staggers as the curse that has plagued his family for centuries suddenly reverses its flow. Instead of draining his life force, it begins channeling power into him, transforming him from a sick young man into something that radiates supernatural authority. The assembled nobles gasp as they witness what appears to be a miraculous, divine blessing. But Sebastian recognizes it as the exact opposite. A demonic investiture that transforms the royal bloodline into a vessel for ancient powers that Christianity has spent centuries trying to suppress. Now, Sebastian signals to his hidden team, we strike. The cathedral erupts into chaos as warrior priests burst from concealment, brandishing weapons blessed specifically for combating necromantic practitioners. But they discover that Cinderella has prepared more thoroughly than they anticipated. Her allied practitioners, disguised as wedding guests, respond with coordinated attacks that turn the house of God into a battlefield between competing forms of supernatural power. Holy water boils when it touches skin, protected by older blessings. Crucifixes crack when held against amulets carved from bones of Christian martyrs who died defending practitioners from persecution. Latin exorcisms falter when countered by incantations in tongues that predate the church by millennia. As the battle rages around them, Cinderella and her transformed husband stand at the altar, protected by barriers of necromantic energy that deflect both physical and spiritual attacks. The entity that once cursed the royal line now serves as their guardian. Its centuries of accumulated power redirected toward protecting the new supernatural dynasty. This kingdom will no longer persecute those who practice the old ways, Cinderella declares, her voice carrying with supernatural force that compels attention even amid the chaos of battle. We offer a new covenant. Serve us willingly and live in peace. Oppose us and face the accumulated wrath of every witch you have ever burned. The wedding has become a coronation, and the coronation has become a revolution. The age of Christian dominion over supernatural practitioners is ending, replaced by a synthesis of temporal and spiritual power that will reshape the nature of European civilization. But as Cinderella claims her throne, she doesn't realize that the church's defeat here is tactical, not strategic. Sebastian has already dispatched messages to Rome, requesting intervention by forces that make his warriors' priests seem like children playing with wooden swords. The real war is about to begin. 3 months after her wedding, Queen Cinderella has transformed the kingdom into something that would be unrecognizable to her predecessor. The royal court now openly employs advisors skilled in divination, healing, and what the church condemns as maleficium, but which the new regime calls applied spiritual science. The transformation extends beyond the palace walls. Throughout the realm, women who once lived in terror of accusation now serve as officially recognized practitioners, licensed by the crown to provide services that compete directly with church offerings. Why confess sins to a priest and hope for divine forgiveness when a practitioner can identify the spiritual imbalances causing guilt and provide practical remedies for correction? Cinderella holds court in a throne room redesigned according to principles from the most ancient grimoires. The throne itself sits at the intersection of ley lines that channel power from sacred sites throughout the kingdom. Mirrors of polished obsidian reflect not just physical appearances, but spiritual auras, allowing the queen to identify supernatural abilities in any who approach her. Justice in this kingdom will no longer be based on arbitrary moral codes imposed by foreign authorities. She announces to a gathering of nobles who have come to pledge their loyalty to the new order. We will judge based on harmony, the balance between individual will and collective welfare, between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. But this new form of justice proves far more terrifying than the arbitrary cruelty it replaced. Cinderella's ability to commune with the spirits of the dead means that no crime can be hidden, no lie can survive scrutiny, no corruption can escape exposure. The guilty face not just earthly punishment, but the active displeasure of those they wronged beyond the grave. The first test of the new system comes when Baron Aldrich von Steinberg is accused of murdering his wife to marry his young mistress. Under the old system, his noble rank and substantial bribes would have ensured acquittal. Under Cinderella's justice, the dead woman herself testifies against him. Let the accused face the spirit of she he is said to have wronged, the queen commands, gesturing toward a mirror that begins to glow with cold fire. The glass surface ripples like disturbed water, and gradually an image forms. not of the living Baroness, but of her corpse, bearing the clear marks of strangulation. Tell us. Cinderella addresses the spirit directly. How did you die? The dead woman's voice emerges from the mirror, like winter wind through bare branches. He strangled me in our bedchamber while I slept, then arranged my body to suggest natural death in my sleep. The poison he placed in my evening wine was meant to weaken me, but his impatience led him to finish the task with his own hands. But this isn't even the most disturbing aspect of the new justice system. Baron Aldrich's execution becomes a demonstration of what happens to those who commit crimes against the new order. Rather than a simple beheading or hanging, he faces what Cinderella calls spiritual reconciliation, a process where he experiences his victim's death from her perspective, feeling every moment of terror and pain he inflicted, before his own death mirrors hers exactly. The execution is conducted publicly in the town square, but the method is unlike anything the kingdom has witnessed before. Cinderella summons the Baroness's spirit into physical manifestation, allowing her to personally strangle her murderer while the crowd watches a dead woman take revenge on her killer. This is what justice looks like, when the dead can speak for themselves. The queen explains to the horrified nobles who witness the spectacle. No longer will the guilty escape consequence simply because their victims cannot testify against them. The demonstration has its intended effect. Throughout the kingdom, unsolved murders are suddenly confessed as perpetrators realize they will inevitably face supernatural investigation. Marriage murders, inheritance killings, political assassinations, crimes that have festered in darkness for decades are exposed as the guilty seek mercy through voluntary admission rather than face the queen's necromantic justice. But the new system also reveals the scope of corruption that has been hidden within seemingly respectable society. Church officials are exposed as embezzlers, tax collectors as extortionists, judges as sellers of verdicts. The kingdom's entire power structure proves to be riddled with crimes that the old system was designed to conceal rather than punish. Prince Friedrich, transformed by his supernatural investiture, serves as his wife's primary enforcer. The curse that once weakened the royal bloodline now grants him abilities that make resistance futile. He can sense lies through changes in the liar's spiritual aura. He can compel truth through direct contact with suspected criminals. Most terrifying of all, he can inflict supernatural punishment that extends beyond death itself. We offer a simple choice, he explains to a gathering of church officials who have been summoned to account for their crimes against practitioners. Submit to our authority and serve the new order willingly, or face judgment that extends into whatever realm awaits you after death. Most choose submission, recognizing that supernatural rulers who can command both the living and the dead represent power beyond anything political authority alone can challenge. But a few, inspired by Brother Sebastian's messages from Rome, choose martyrdom instead. Their executions serve as warnings of what awaits those who oppose the synthesis of temporal and spiritual authority that Cinderella represents. They die not just physically, but spiritually, their souls bound to serve the new order even after death as eternal prisoners who can never find rest or redemption. As news of these transformations spreads throughout Christian Europe, Cinderella realizes that her revolution has succeeded beyond her original ambitions. She set out to save herself and her fellow practitioners from persecution. Instead, she has created a template for overturning the entire structure of Christian civilization. But success brings new dangers. Rome has taken notice of events in her kingdom, and the Vatican's response will involve powers that make Brother Sebastian's warriors priests seem like amateur enthusiasts playing at spiritual warfare. The letter arrives sealed with wax that bears the mark of the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the Vatican's most secret department, responsible for dealing with supernatural threats that conventional church authorities cannot address. Cardinal Alessandro Severino, whose title barely hints at his true function as commander of the church's occult military forces, writes in elegant Latin that barely conceals the fury behind his words. Your Majesty, the letter begins with formal politeness that makes the threat more ominous. It has come to our attention that your kingdom has experienced certain irregularities in matters of spiritual authority. We write to offer our assistance in resolving these unfortunate departures from Orthodox Christian practice. Cinderella reads the letter aloud in her transformed throne room while Prince Friedrich paces like a caged predator, his supernatural senses detecting the spiritual poisons worked into the very ink and parchment. The document is itself a weapon, designed to weaken her defenses and create vulnerabilities that more direct attacks can exploit. They're not just threatening political intervention. Elizabeth's spirit warns through the ashes that Cinderella still carries in a reliquary worn around her neck. This Cardinal Severino commands resources that most church officials don't even know exist. His forces include beings that were never human, creatures bound to serve Christian authority through pacts older than the Vatican itself. Through her network of allied practitioners throughout Europe, Cinderella has been gathering intelligence about the Church's secret capabilities. What she has learned makes her previous battles with Brother Sebastian seem like children's games by comparison. The Sacred Congregation maintains a fortress monastery hidden beneath the streets of Rome, where warrior monks undergo training that would drive ordinary humans mad. They learn to channel angelic wrath through their own bodies, transforming themselves into vessels for supernatural forces that burn away everything they consider corrupt. They study demonology not to summon dark powers, but to understand how to destroy them completely, ensuring that not even spiritual fragments survive their intervention. But most terrifying of all, they have access to relics that contain actual fragments of divine power, splinters of the true cross that can wound spiritual entities, drops of martyr's blood that can compel truthfulness even from the dead, and texts written by angels that can rewrite the fundamental laws governing supernatural existence. They're coming, Prince Friedrich announces, his transformed senses detecting approach from hundreds of miles away. 3 days, perhaps 4, a force unlike anything we've faced before. The prince's supernatural awareness reveals the composition of the approaching army. 50 warrior monks whose faith has been forged in battles against demons across multiple continents. A dozen scholar priests who understand theoretical frameworks for dismantling magical workings and leading them all. Cardinal Severino himself, a man who has personally confronted and destroyed supernatural entities that have terrorized entire regions. But this isn't even the most dangerous aspect of the approaching confrontation. Through her most trusted scouts, Cinderella learns that Cardinal Severino has spent months gathering intelligence about her rise to power. He knows about the bone rituals in the forest circle, the entity that she bound through marriage to the cursed royal line. And most damning of all, he has identified the prophecy that guided her creation as a supernatural weapon. The Cardinal's strategy is not simply to defeat her in direct confrontation, but to unravel the entire magical framework that sustains her power. He brings with him artifacts specifically designed to sever connections between practitioners and the spirits they command, to break bindings that tie supernatural entities to earthly service, and to purify bloodlines of accumulated magical corruption. If he succeeds, Elizabeth's spirit explains with growing alarm, you will not simply be defeated. You will be spiritually sterilized, rendered completely incapable of accessing the powers that define your identity. And the entity bound to your husband's bloodline will be released from service, free to resume its original purpose of consuming royal life force. Faced with the approaching annihilation of everything she has built, Cinderella makes a decision that surprises even her supernatural advisors. Rather than preparing purely defensive measures, she chooses to accelerate the transformation process that began with her marriage to Prince Friedrich. If the Church seeks to destroy the synthesis of temporal and spiritual power, she declares, then we will complete that synthesis beyond their ability to unravel it. The ritual she initiates requires the willing participation of every practitioner in her network. The sacrifice of accumulated power that generations of persecuted women have stored in hidden sanctuary. And most significantly, the transformation of her own physical form into something that transcends the boundary between human and spiritual entity. The process is agonizing beyond description. As Cinderella's body dissolves and reconstitutes itself according to patterns written in the most forbidden grimoires, she experiences death and resurrection simultaneously, becoming something that is neither fully alive nor entirely dead, neither completely human nor wholly supernatural. When the transformation concludes, she exists as pure will-given form, a being capable of commanding reality through direct spiritual authority rather than through magical techniques. She no longer needs to summon spirits or cast spells. She has become a force of nature unto herself. Prince Friedrich undergoes a parallel transformation, his cursed bloodline evolving into something that can channel the kind of power usually reserved for divine intervention. Together, they represent a new form of existence that challenges the fundamental assumptions underlying both Christian theology and traditional magical practice. As Cardinal Severino's forces arrive at the kingdom's borders, they discover that they are no longer facing a supernatural rebellion that can be suppressed through conventional means. They confront entities that have evolved beyond the categories their training prepared them to combat. The final battle will not be between church and witchcraft, but between competing visions of how spiritual and temporal authority should be integrated in human civilization. The outcome will determine whether Europe's future belongs to hierarchical religious control or to a synthesis of power that places supernatural in service of pragmatic governance. But as both sides prepare for confrontation, neither realizes that their conflict has attracted the attention of even older powers, entities that predate both Christianity and the magical traditions it sought to suppress. Beings that view the struggle between church and practitioners as an opportunity to reclaim influence. They surrendered millennia ago when humans first learned to bind spiritual forces to earthly purposes. The true war is about to begin, and its outcome will reshape not just one kingdom, but the entire relationship between the mortal world and the supernatural realms that surround it. This is the end of our journey through Cinderella's true origins. But is it really the end? In dark corners of old European libraries, scholars still discover manuscript fragments that hint at even more disturbing versions of the tale. In remote villages, grandmothers still whisper versions of the story that would shock modern audiences with their unflinching portrayal of what survival required in times when being different meant death. Looking at our sanitized modern fairy tales, do you think we've lost something essential by removing the darkness from these stories? Were they originally meant not to comfort children, but to prepare them for a world where survival sometimes requires embracing powers that civilized society fears to acknowledge? If you're drawn to these forbidden histories hidden beneath familiar tales, join our circle of seekers. Subscribe, and together, we'll continue exploring the shadows cast by stories we thought we knew. The darkness holds more truth than the light dares to reveal. And our journey into forgotten secrets has only just begun.